Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Exposure Scientist podcast. My name is Alex LeBeau. Today, we are going to be discussing an interesting and great new publication that has come out from ACGIH. And as anyone is familiar, ACGIH is the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists. They've been around for many years, and they offer great resources to individuals on a number of different fronts. The resource that I will be discussing today is the publication or second edition of the Bioaerosol Assessment and Control reference book. If anyone is familiar with the original version that came out in 1999, that was a great publication that has been a book of reference for a number of different organization and industrial hygienists for many years. And as of 2018, 2019, there was a renewed effort to update that book for current issues using the knowledge and experience gathered over the last 20 years since the previous publication to work on a new edition, update it with a lot more information, use that basic information that was in the original book, but grow and expand upon it. So I had the opportunity to do that. One thing that was reinvigorated ACGIH was something called the Bioaerosols Committee. If you're somewhat familiar with AIHA or ACGIH, AIHA has the Indoor Environmental Quality Committee, of which I was a chair for a while recently. ACGIH has a Bioaerosols Committee, very similar, I'll say, interest area. There's a lot of overlap. People who are interested in working on the AIHA, IAQ committee are also on the ACGIH, I'll say bioaerosol interest group. I am on the ACGIH bioaerosol committee. It was called a member candidate. That's someone who is interested in becoming a member of the committee itself that is acknowledged and accepted by ACGIH. And one of the opportunities that I had while continuing to be a member candidate of the committee is working on the Bioaerosol Assessment and Control book. This includes the ability to look at the material that's being made available, offering some recommendations on it, and even having the opportunity to co-author one of the chapters in the book. So for people who are on video, I'm just going to show this to you. This is the second edition Bioaerosol Assessment and Control book. It was originally called the Red Book. This one is similar in color. Has a little more finer detail in the front than the old one that's sitting on the shelf behind me. But it's still, I'll say, the Red Book. And a lot of people have referred to this book, the Red Book or the ACGIH Bioaerosol Assessment Control book, as the gold standard for the impact of biological particles on everyday lives or human health. And I think it's a great opportunity if you are new in the field to familiarize yourself with this book. If you're interested in indoor environmental quality, it's got a lot of great information on there, sampling techniques, risk assessments, how the basis for health concerns, sampling strategy and planning analysis or sample analysis, data interpretation. There's lots of good information in here, and I think it's a good primer for if you are wanting to do this as your career, wanting to do this in your everyday life, or just kind of a reminder, or maybe it's a kind of an update for people who've been doing it a while, just to see what new research has been done, what new research is available, and how the reference book is kind of organized. So the one chapter that I had co-authored in here is called the antimicrobial agents chapter. Now, originally, this chapter in the original book was referred to as biocides. Biocides are still a term that is used across the globe to talk about something that's going to have an antimicrobial effect or antimicrobial activity on a microbiological agent. But we updated the chapter title to fit more within the US EPA regulatory scheme. So if you go look at the Pfeiffer stuff now, that stuff is now referring to things as antimicrobial agents. If you go to the EPA pesticide manual, you can go and see that they're referred to as antimicrobial agents Now, again, EU still uses the term biocide, but collectively and domestically, we refer to these as antimicrobial agents. So we updated the chapter to talk about antimicrobial agents and what their effects are and what they do, what types of antimicrobial agents are out there, and what they mean. So there's a lot of good information here. It goes through public health antimicrobial pesticides. It defines those. It gives you lots of references. I have the chapter here. I'll just go through. Within this chapter alone, there are 105 references. There's a lot of good information, and for you to go find it online and say, listen, I'm using the reference book, but I can even easily just go get it from the source itself, just so you have both. So it talks about public health antimicrobial pesticides, non-public health antimicrobial pesticides. It goes through. We talk about animal diseases and biopesticides. We also in here include EPA definitions. This is heavily again geared domestically, talking about types of antimicrobial agents, whether sanitizers, disinfectants, sterilants, fungicides, virulicides. That's all included in here. Touches on Health Canada, touches on FDA, but does go through in more detail than the last chapter did on the registration process, because I think that's important for people to understand who are using these products, what the process is for registration. Whenever we talk about pesticide antimicrobial products for use as pesticides, and it's laid out in this chapter. When should you use them? How do you use them? Where do you use them? When should you not use them? That's all evaluated in the data requirements from EPA. That stuff has to be submitted for registration purposes. There has to be safety data that's submitted, toxicity studies. We talk about some of the toxicity studies in here so you can understand that it's not just a quick process to get through. There's a lot of data requirements, and it even talks about in here if you're interested in registering with US EPA or Health Canada, you can have what's called pre-registration consultations with the agency. Listen, explain to them, lay out to them, give them presentations. This is what we are interested in doing. This is what we'd like to do. This is a basic understanding of our antimicrobial agent, its pesticidal activity, um, and get their feedback. And it may take a few days to get. I forgot what the turnaround time is currently. During COVID, there was a different turnaround time for getting responses, but there's a feedback process. They lay out things that they think based on what they know or based on what you supply about it to them, what needs to be done, whether there's acute toxicity testing, whether they require some chronic toxicity testing, what product chemistry can you provide? We want to know all about the active ingredient. And this is very much for the active ingredient that we're discussing here. And within the chapter itself, there's a discussion of the active ingredient versus inerts. If you are not familiar, most of the active ingredient is the ingredient that has the antimicrobial activity in there, and the inerts are other things that are included in there. Surfactants, something that's going to prolong shelf life or reduce degradation. So that's all included in the final product itself. But again, their testing is interested in the active ingredient. Again, product chemistry for the same thing. Efficacy data. This is always important, and then people, I don't think appreciate this enough, is the understanding of what is required from EPA and the efficacious activity for the product. They have specific guidelines, and they're discussed within the chapter. They're referenced within the chapter. I believe we even included uh, referenced. There's their reference guidelines is talking about CFR in here, Code of Federal Registration Regulations, and what is included. It's even referencing the actual tests themselves within the reference section for discussion of this is what they want to see for a virilicide, general disinfectant, or something that's going to be included in disinfectant. This is how you perform the test. I think it's important. These are not things that you're going to be able to do yourself as far as performing tests. You have to contract with the laboratory. You have to get them to understand what your product is. Even discuss following your consultation with the EPA. Approach them and say, this is what EPA would like to see. They can use the guidelines. They can show that it's effective. They can show there's an effective log reduction in the concentration over a certain period of time following the guidelines that are set up by EPA. And I think that's important. Understanding all this is key to selection and whether you should use or should not use it in which scenarios. Even within here, we discussed the application methodology. EPA is going to evaluate and say, okay, how did you apply it during your tests? Was it appropriate the way that you applied it? Did you show that it could be effective against the target organisms or target microorganisms in the methodology? That's all going to have to be laid out. There may be, if you have a pre-wet wipe, if you have something that's going to release an aerosol, if you have something that's going to serve as a fumigant, all those different individual tests are likely going to be needed by EPA to establish the different application methodologies. So we go through that here as well. We also talk about antimicrobial use selection and application. What are the use conditions? What are the use conditions for occupied spaces? What are the difference for different settings? Do you have to do things differently in healthcare settings versus non-healthcare settings, or even food context scenarios? That's all laid out here as well, because again, it's typically for these applications, it's a use scenario. How are you using it? Where are you using it? And why are you using it? One big focus we have in the chapter is it necessary to use the disinfectant? Not all scenarios are going to be the same. There's not a one size fits all guideline for every scenario. You're going to have to look at your unique scenario and determine whether or not the scenario that's being presented to you is the antimicrobial necessary, or is there a way that you can remove impacted building materials in such a way that antimicrobial use is not needed? That is a lot of things to think about. I say impacted building materials, but we can go beyond this because we talk about it in here as well. Water. What are we using for disinfectant in water? There's many different types that could be applied in the water setting as well. Is it appropriate to have a secondary disinfectant system to supplement the primary disinfectant from the public water utility? We get in here as well. And as a follow-on to the original chapter, we discuss antimicrobial active ingredients. This is not a all-encompassing coverage. There are more books about that are encompassing of all pesticidal products. Uh, this is a discussion of some that may be applicable to the indoor environment. We talk about water-based, dry formulations, and gas vapor phase active ingredients for use in the typical scenarios. So we go through the different types. I'll say general areas of antimicrobials and their use patterns. We even introduce here some antimicrobial material preservatives, since more and more they're being integrated into textiles for use in the indoor environment. What are the targets products? How are they being used? What pesticides or antimicrobials are being used within those products? And also nano-based materials. How are those being applied? What scenarios? There's even somewhat of a discussion of other antimicrobial products. And these other antimicrobial products, I'll say, are novel new products where research is ongoing. So we want to present where things may go with this. In here, there's a discussion, and I'll say, this is a statement. EPA says a statement. Currently, there's over 4,000 antimicrobial agents registered, active ingredient agents registered with U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Where is that going to go? It's going to increase. But what are the products, or what are the processes that are going to do that? So we touch on that here, as well as slightly, we get into it more in other chapters in the book, for precautions for using antimicrobials. When should you use them? When should you not use them again? Are there PPE that need to be used? Are there scenarios where you have to have an environment where it is not occupied? You think about vaporized hydrogen peroxide, VHP, and there's specific uh, label requirements for occupation of spaces where VHP is being used, and all the clearance methodologies, and establishing that the VHP is below any thresholds of concern. And again, we reference the TLVs, ACGIH TLVs in here. So there's a lot that goes into antimicrobial use in a variety of scenarios. And I think that's important. because again, a lot during COVID, disinfectants were used early on. There was discussion of cleaning and disinfecting, and the proper methodology for doing that. And additionally, a lot of guidance that we at AIHA put out was talking about cleaning and disinfecting your facilities. And we're working on updating that guidance now to make it more applicable to all scenarios, more scenarios, let's say, like a general cleaning and disinfection plan for facilities or non healthcare facilities. If you think of healthcare, obviously, they're going to have infection prevention and control plans. But what are non-healthcare facilities going to have? They need to have something in place, a general cleaning, a seasonal cleaning, and maybe an atypical or pandemic level kind of scenario where you're using these products. Identify which products should be used, have a written plan, do all this stuff. And, this is all, again, laid out. These are things to think about for antimicrobials. Is it practical to use? Is it does it make sense to use? Does the scenario call for it? And again, with the safety, one example we have in here is, and I came across this at a project, I'll say recently, where someone discussed it, the use of antimicrobial agents within operating HVAC systems or HVAC systems in general. Don't, we kind of laid out there, don't apply these in operating systems that could spread whatever antimicrobial in a non-traditional format into the occupied space of a building. But additionally, is that product registered for use in an HVAC system? And I think that's key as well. You have to read the label and understand, does the label allow for use in HVAC systems? And if it doesn't, there's a reason why they may not show this be effective in the for antimicrobials within the system or in the delivery mechanism. It may be presenting a health hazard to those that are in there. If there's any residual that may be released over a certain amount of time, there's a lot that goes into thinking about where to apply these materials in a safe manner. And that's what the key really is a safe manner. Evaluate the scenario. If you don't have the knowledge or expertise, have someone come in and do the scenario. And this is another thing. I'll say a discussion in here. There are some products, I'll say, that are labeled that are not. I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. They're they're not. You don't have to send in information to EPA for them to evaluate it, but they do have to understand. You have to have efficacy data on those materials. These products are typically referred to as EPA as regulated pesticide devices. They are pesticide devices that physically or mechanically destroy, repel, prevent, or mitigate pests that are distinct from antimicrobial pesticides. It does not preclude you from having to have data on hand and on file. That information does not have to be submitted to EPA, but you better have your backup of this information. Some of the um, examples that are given are ultraviolet light devices, insect traps, sound generation, water, air, and treatments to design or reduce or eliminate microorganisms. So there are other products out there, as I said, regulated pesticide devices that are covered in here as well. Another area that I had thought about is a something that came up during the pandemic that has grown recently are these antimicrobial surface coatings that provide long lasting effectiveness on surfaces, or that's their intent. Those products are, um, I'll say, novel in the way that they operate, and they are, I think, becoming more and more prevalent out there. There are products that you can spray on, and once it has, I'll say, gone through a time for a quote unquote curing process to adhere to the surface, it relays antimicrobial activity over a certain amount of time. I think, per the test methodology, don't quote me on this, but I think it was up to 7 days for how long it had to be effective. So it could say that it had that long lasting effect. There's guidance out there. I don't have it in front of me, but it is out there to check. So there's a lot that goes on with antimicrobials. It may be a boring subject for some. It's stuff that I have worked on previously, and it is a very interesting area because there are times where antimicrobial agents are necessary for use. And there are specific scenarios where they are necessary for use, but identifying and using them judiciously when they are called for or when the scenario doesn't really need it. Porous, semi-porous, non-porous materials, what is going to be used, even selection on those types of materials, on what's effective. Something may be effective on a porous material that wouldn't be effective on semi-porous, or vice versa. Something that's effective on non-porous is not going to potentially work on a porous material. All that's covered by EPA. The important thing is this chapter gives you the background for why things are done. A lot of people, I think, operate on, well, I don't know why this is done. I'll just use it the way I want to use it. I've seen that plenty of times. Well, I'm just kind of using it how I think it needs to be done. But there's a reason why we do things. This chapter on antimicrobial agents kind of lays out why we do things. And I think it's a great opportunity to kind of get where we are currently on antimicrobial agents and use this for your reference material for why it is necessary to, if you have a remediation contractor that's coming in, challenge them on it, understand what they're using, why they're using it. Are they following the label? Have them spell out what they're going to do. Go observe them using it. If they're using it in an improper way or non-label approved way, stop them. Have a mechanism in your specification for stopping work and reevaluating. But review it before they get there. Review it before you get out in the field. Even for those, pardon me, those products that I talked about for regulated pesticide devices. I've seen scenarios where the safety data that's provided is very lacking. This is an opportunity for industrial hygienists to provide some kind of third party oversight. If you're an organization or someone who's thinking about putting something, a cleaning, quote unquote, cleaning device within your HVAC system, have some third party oversight of the safety. Have them give you the safety data, review it, understand it, identify what exposure levels may be, because I've seen some safety data that is very questionable. Some organizations, and they say, well, this exposure isn't as bad as this, so you should be fine. That's not sufficient. You need to have a clear understanding of what the hazards are, what you may be exposing individuals to. Uh, are there any health effects related to, I'll say, something that's being generated from any kind of device, uh, unintentionally or otherwise? So there's a lot that goes into this. Again, Bioaerosol Assessment and Control, second edition, came out just a few months ago. I'm putting it on the camera again just so everybody sees. It's a great opportunity for you to get up on this. Again, the editors were Sherry Marsham and John Springston. They are Jack Springston. They are very active in the organization and did a great job of, I'll say, herding us cats on getting the chapter completed, each chapter completed, and the final edition of the book, again, finally issued this year. So if you have any questions about the book or specifically the chapter of antimicrobial agents, please feel free to reach out. You can go to ACGIH's website to look for Bioaerosol Assessment Control. It's available both in a digital and print edition. It may be nice having both for your purposes. So you can go to their website and download it. I think members get a lower rate. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I hope you've gotten some great information from this and learned. If you weren't aware the Bioaerosol book was re-released, learning it now, I think that's wonderful. Appreciate the opportunity for you joining us today, and we'll talk to you in the next episode. Thank you so much.